session. While we wait for others to join, I just quickly want to talk about the Abuja Literary and Arts Festival, which so far we are on day 5. Yes, day 5 of the festival, and it's been so amazing. Um, Basically, the Abuja Literary and Arts Festival is a festival that seeks to create a community for the creative ecosystem to thrive here in Abuja and Nigeria. We really believe in giving creatives the opportunity to highlight, express, and just create a platform where creatives can be their best self. And that is why we created this. And one of the things we also do is that we also look at the social issues that affect us as creative, as Nigerians, and as Africans. And we look at these issues and see how we can use art as a guiding force in addressing it and hopefully in creating change and changing perspective on these issues. And that's why this year the theme for ALITFEST 23 is becoming one with the other. Now, we chose this theme because we saw that in the last year, in fact, from 2020, we saw that there's been this ordering of people, either on the basis of gender, of status, of sexual orientation. There's just been different ways that, of tribe, of, race. There's been ways that we have been ordered. And for us, we felt that this was such an important conversation that we needed to have, because when we order each other, we miss out on the opportunity to learn, to evolve, to grow. And this festival was a platform for us to see what was previously the other as something that we relate to, as someone we relate to, and we can see the similarities in ourselves. And that's why we created the festival. We kicked it off with the amazing stage play by BK Chukwumerije. And I'm sure if you were there, you know that it was the best time ever. And from that, we've had panel sessions on different issues. We've had book readings. Later today, we'll be having a film screening, and we hope that you guys will be there. But for us, this is our way of using art as a driving force to highlight issues and to create platforms and create understanding on how to better address it. And so this is just a little brief on the idea for this year and what ALITFEST seeks to do. And today we'll be having an incredible session in a few minutes, where we would go into the topic for the day, which I'm sure a lot of you are, I'm sure we all have our different ideas and perspectives on it. And I can't wait myself to just learn, because the topic for today is Africa the next great frontier for stories? And if you're within the creative community, it's a big topic. Or is the world beginning to notice our art more? Is there been some, what's the word? Well, either way, it's just a conversation that's been happening. And for us, we would really like to look at this as creatives, as people who are within this space. And I'm so excited. And I would love to call on our moderator for the day, Mr. Paul Liam. I hope I'm pronouncing that. I'm so sorry if that is the wrong pronunciation. Who is an incredible poet, a critic, and an author. I'd just like to call him to come up and take it over. So please, can we give our virtual applause as he takes over from me? Thank you so much. Please, I don't see the applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction and insight into the essence of the ALS. Yes, you got the name correct. My name is Paul Liam. Liam is a Tiv name. People always wonder whether it is the Limam, as some people would like to call me, but yeah, it's Liam. So thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues of the pen. Thank you very much for joining this panel discussion today. The background to the conversation as regards to why the festival is holding has already been laid by the first speaker who introduced this panel. And without delay, my job is a very simple one, and it requires me, of course, to, facilitate the conversation, moderate the session. And without wasting time, I would like to begin by introducing our panelists for today. In no particular order of preference or of importance, I would begin by introducing Dr. Kaltume Akubo. I also do not know if I'm getting the name correct, but I hope she would forgive me, and I hope she's on the call as well. So Akubo, who is preferably called Peace, is an author of several international peer-reviewed journals and books. She is a writer and poet who authored Sonnet for Motherhood, Poems to Inspire You, an anthology, Perspectives, Angels in Classrooms, Growth Through Life's Journey, No Time for Later, and the Goal Setter Workbook for Young Adults and Professionals. She is also a STEM ambassador, a sustainable and renewable green energy SME, a data analyst, a project management professional, and a business analyst. The founder of Gift for Love Charity Foundation, an NGO committed to empowering the less privileged in the society, especially orphans, women, youths, and positively impacting humanity. She has a bachelor's degree in petroleum engineering from Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University, Nigeria, a master's degree in petroleum engineering from Heriot-Watt University, Scotland, UK, and a PhD in chemical and process engineering from the University of Leeds, UK. She is a recipient of several awards, including the 2010 President NYSC Honors Award in Nigeria and the Best State Youth Corps Member Award, Bayelsa State, Nigeria. She is married and blessed with 3 children. So this is one of our lead panelists, Dr. Kaltume Akubo. That's the summary of her profile. But if you go to her website, www.giftforlovecharityfoundation.org, you could read more about her NGO and the beautiful work that she does within the sector. Our next panelist, whose profile I shall be reading, is Mikhail Musialowski. Mikhail is a poet, cultural activist, and scholar born in Portland. He lives in Germany, where he teaches migration and cultural studies. He also works as a coordinator of the European Master in Migration and Intercultural Relation, EMIR, and researches Nigerian poetry at the Calvin Ozeski University in Edinburgh. His interests are in the promotion of cosmopolitanism and the deconstruction of colonial discourses through creative expression. Mikhail is a very brief person, so his bio is also brief. But I am sure that when we encounter him eventually in the course of this conversation, we would be able to get an insight into his depth of knowledge and experience within this sphere. Our next panelist is Faith Moyosore Agbola. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. And she's a performance poet and cultural producer. She has performed poetry on various stages and media platforms, including the Netherlands Embassy, Nigeria, TEDx Alausa, GT Banks You Read, Coco Pelli Night of Storytelling, Faji Friday, Ubuntu Festival, City FM, and WFM 91.7, among others. She has also shared her ideas as a creative entrepreneur on global stages, such as the Expo 2020 Dubai and the Africa NXT Festival. She has been commissioned to create recorded poetry campaigns for brands such as Norfolk Black History Month, a UK cultural organization, and Do Take Action, an African NGO. She is the founder of the African Writers and the convener of African Writers Meet. In recognition of her work in literature, she was awarded the fully funded Chevening Scholarship in 2020, and in July 2023, she was nominated as a Rising Talent of the Year Spoken Word in the APVA Awards. Of course, our social media handle is at Faith Moyosore. So you could follow her to know more about her if you do not already follow her. And our other panelists, Abubakar Adam Ibrahim, I am not sure he's on the call, and I do not have his bio, but I suppose he might be joining or not. And then, of course, if he joined, we would, introduce him once I get his bio. And, but in the meantime, these are our panelists. And of course, I've been introduced already. So there is no point reiterating that. However, we're going to proceed. As I've already been pre-informed, we're going to give at least 10 minutes to each of our panelists to speak to the topic or to the theme of this panel discussion. And as it were, our theme for today, for this discussion is Africa the next great frontier for stories? This is a very pertinent question, topic and question, given the rise of African literature today and even in years past, and the various conversation and debates that surrounds African literary production with regards to the kinds of stories that Africans write today, and also in the context of the kind of story that the West, appreciate or engage with regards to African writers and African stories. But again, Africans, continue to play a key role in terms of telling the African story to the Western audience and even to the African audience. But again, it is not in my place, to tell you all about this topic. This is my own way of introducing, the theme for this conversation. I therefore would be calling on the speakers to speak to this topic before I, pose my questions to them, after which I understand again the participants are going to also raise questions or reactions to our discussion. So again, in no particular order, I'd like to call on Dr. Katume to speak to this issue of Africa becoming the great frontier for stories. So Dr. Katume, if you're in the house, please, the floor is over to you. Is Dr. Katume in the house? Okay. If Doctor is not in the house, shall we listen to Fitz Agbola? Fitz, please, could you speak to the issue, to the theme of this panel discussion, please, while we wait for Katume to join? Hello, is anyone hearing me? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
I can see Faith on the call. I don't know if she can't hear us.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, please. Sorry. I couldn't hear anything. I was trying to fix my network. Did you ask me a question?
Oh, okay. So yeah, sorry about your network. I was calling on you to speak to the theme of this panel discussion, maybe for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and then we'll proceed from there. What's your take on this topic?
Okay, so for me, the question is Africa the next great frontier for stories? It's a very interesting question. And personally, my own perspective is the question accurate? Is the question apt? Because if you break the question down, it comes off as, is Africa the next great frontier for stories? That means you're implying that maybe Africa has not been a great frontier for stories. Or is the question supposed to be, is the West just catching up to the untapped treasure that is African storytelling? Because Africa's Africa has always been a great hub for storytelling. Our history, our customs, our culture has been passed down from generations through storytelling. So from the folk tales to the myths, to the griots, the bards, the different people across the continent. So I feel like even our movies, our cinema, our music, we have been consuming African stories for centuries, and it is how we have been able to create and pass down our history. So that question is dependent on who is asking. If we're asking from Africa, we already know we have great stories. We've been telling our stories for a long time. But it's people from the outside, people that have not been privy to this awesomeness that is African stories, that will say, oh, is Africa the next great frontier for stories? So that's what I think about that. And I believe that maybe the reasons for this shift is because over time, the Western form of storytelling, Western narratives, Western ideologies, Western movies, books, cultures have been dominating the media, different creative platforms. So for music, theater, film, and they've been dominated for so many years, obviously because of, it could be power, it could be their position and different aspects of that. But because they've been dominated for so many years, there could be a stage of like narrative fatigue. I'll put it like narrative fatigue, where people have been exposed to something over and over, and then there's this new clamor for like something new, and that's for people outside of Africa, by the way, because we already know we have great stories. So there's this clamor for something new, something different, because you've been fed the same thing over and over, because it's something that creatives do. When something is working, that they tend to repeat that same formula. And when it's just one particular culture or continent or country that is dominating that, it then becomes repetitive. And so I feel like the reason why there's this new interest in African storytelling is because there's been a sort of oversaturation, over domination, and now people are just looking for something new. So I would say that what we're experiencing is kind of like a cultural renaissance. So we're now shifting towards something new. We're now looking for what is the new thing, what is the new experience that we can have, what is the new thing that we can be exposed to, and also the topics around diversity, more inclusion. So people are now looking for what else is out there. But Africa has always been a great frontier for stories. We've always been telling stories for many years. It's how we've been able to pass down our culture, our tradition, and so the real questions is West just catching up to Africa's great, rich tradition of storytelling? That's my take on the topic.
Wow. Thank you, Fitz, for this very insightful perspective to the topic and the poser of the rationality even for the question and for whom this question is intended. You've highlighted some of the core of the issues, but I would not say more. I will move to our next speaker, whom I shall invite now to also speak to the topic. Mikhail Musialowski. Mikhail, if you're in the house, please, what's your take on this topic? I know for a fact that as a European, you have been engaging with African stories for a while now. You are particularly researching in African poetry and literature as well. What's your reaction to this topic of the day?
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Paul. Thank you for the invitation. It is really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you and to be able to share my perspective, my limited perspective on the issue, coming from my experience, as you said, as someone who is passionate about Nigerian poetry, someone who teaches and tries to promote Nigerian literature and poetry, but broadly also African stories, narratives, and literatures, which I am personally very passionate and fascinated about, and I understand and feel the power that these narratives and that these stories have. As the previous speaker, Mrs. Agbola, said, the stories from the African continent are stories that have a rich and long traditions of storytelling, of oral histories, of traditions, and so on. But the central question here that we seem to want to address is how is the perception of the West of African narratives and on African stories, and how does the West, as this big entity that we can generalize, reacts to these narratives? My answer to that, from my experience, is that there is indeed a new openness and a new willingness to connect to narratives from Africa. This happens mostly, from my perception, through the novel, through fiction, as we have seen in the last decades. Nigerian fiction and African fiction, very often written by migrants, by people who moved to the West, has been very popular and has been very celebrated. But of course, this is just one little part and one little piece of the beautiful mosaic, of the powerful mosaic of African stories and narratives. So I would say, yes, there is an openness, but it is quite selective. It celebrates certain authors and certain narratives that kind of fit the expectations, the prejudices of the West towards Africa. This openness and this willingness to learn, to connect to these narratives, is not there in my perception. For example, poetry. This is why I see it as an important task as a lecturer, as a researcher, to bring Nigerian poetry, African poetry closer to the audiences here in the West. I would also say that when we talk about the West, and of course we can make this categorization, the West as one entity, but the West is also very diverse, with diverse audiences, with diverse political and cultural contexts. So, for example, Germany is different from the US, and the perception of literature, the consumption of literature in Germany is different than the one in the US, than the one in France, than the one in Italy. So it is difficult to answer the question, what is the perception of the West as a whole? But I would claim that this little openness, this little connection that is being created happens mainly through the academia and through the university, or through scholarly research. There is a focus, a new focus of scholarly research on African narratives, rediscovery of those, and celebration of those. If it happens in the general public, in the general audience, my perception is that it is still not the case. And it would be very important, and it would be a very rich experience for the readers in the West to read African stories and African narratives, to learn about their power, to learn about the humanity, the messages of humanity, of cosmopolitanism, of unity, of peace that are contained in them, but also to confront the people with the realities that the poets, the authors in Africa face, and also to confront Western audiences with the fact that part of these realities, the consequences, the effects, are driven by colonialism and neo-colonialism. So the West is responsible for a big part of the suffering that is happening today in Africa, and that is registered in African stories and literatures, partially. So not all the literature is about this, but it would be important for the Western audiences to come in contact with these narratives to realize the historical background that is there, and to foster a connection, a human connection between people in Africa and people in the West, to cross the borders, to destroy the divisive borders and to come into dialogue while realizing the common humanity that is uniting us. So to sum up, my answer is African narratives are perceived, are consumed and are read by the West, but in a very limited way, mostly in the academia.
Thank you very much, Mikhail, for your brilliant submission on this very important topic for today. So I'll move, if our next panelist is in the house, Dr. Katume. Dr. Khartoum, if you're in the house, could you take over and speak to the topic for this discussion? Okay. I would assume that Dr. Khartoum is not on the call. Is Abubakar Adam Ibrahim on the call? If you're on the call, sir, could you, speak to the topic? Okay. I take it that Dr. Katume and Abubakar Adam Ibrahim are not on the call yet. Therefore,
we have, yes, Mr. Abubakar is on the call. I don't know if he can hear us, but he is on the call.
Oh, okay. Abubakar, please, if you're on the call, could you take the floor, sir? Okay. In the meantime, I don't know if it's a network connection problem or that they can't hear me, but we would proceed while I assume that they would join us and contribute their take to the topic. Okay, I'll go now to Faith. Faith, I'd like to know, we've done the justice of, speaking generally to the topic of the day, but more specifically, you raised some vital questions with regards to, even the topic for this conversation. And you also said that Africa has, always been a great hub for, great stories. However, I'd like to know, what do you think, that could be responsible for the sort of perspective, the selective perspective or appreciation of African stories that may be responsible for this kind of question and for this kind of topic that we are discussing with respect to why is this relevant? Why is African stories relevant, and why should Africa become the great frontier for for stories? I'd like to hear your take on this. Take.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. So I just want to clarify the question, right? So you're asking if why Africa is now a great frontier for stories, and what is shaping it. I just want to be sure because I'm not sure I got the question very well. Is it possible for you to repeat the question?
So yeah, almost there. So my question was, why is it important for Africa to become the great frontier for African stories or for stories in general?
Huh.
This is in
Okay, so
response to your earlier statement, with regards to Africa already being a great hub for stories.
okay, so the thing about it is, my perspective is that Africa has always been a great hub for stories. And recently, it seems like the world outside is beginning to catch up. And now they're beginning to get involved in our storytelling. So there's a lot of collaborations going on. They're platforming our writers, publishing their works. They're working with our filmmakers. Afrobeats is like everywhere. Our music is doing well. So many aspects of like our storytelling, theater, and production is going out to the world. But there is a risk with that. Like something is happening because there's something about cultural appropriation. So cultural appropriation basically is the act of borrowing, imitating, or adopting elements from one culture by members of another culture, often without understanding or like respecting the cultural context. Now, the problem with this is cultural appropriation can both be deliberate and unconscious. And with this kind of dynamic, they don't act, the other people that are taking on board our work and the things that we're doing, they don't have the full idea of it. They don't fully understand the cultural background, the history. And so there's a risk of, if we don't push forward our story, if we don't push ourselves upward, if we don't rise up to the task ahead, because right now there's a lot of interest in what we're doing. If you don't take control of that narrative, there's a risk of these new people that are all of a sudden interested in what we're doing. There's a risk of stereotyping and misrepresentation. There's a risk of like loss of our cultural significance. So some important aspects of our storytelling can be trivialized. The way we speak our language, even the way we speak English, is different. The way we think about English is different. Myself as a poet, there are certain metaphors and certain word plays I will use and things I will say in my poetry that might not be easy to understand by someone who does not understand the full context or cultural background of it. And so when you now maybe try to take on some things that I'm doing, maybe imitate me or work with me, you might not fully understand some of those things and you might not adequately judge it. So I feel like it's very important that we rise up to the ranks, and it's very important that we're having this conversation so that some of these things will not be happening. Also, like marginalization as well. A lot of African voices and stories. Is there someone speaking? A lot of African. What did you say?
Go ahead. I think it's just an interruption.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to be sure. So aside from that as well, also marginalization of our voices. There's a lot of clamor for representation, but then you put people on those stages and in those platforms, and you don't even have like consultants. You don't have the full picture, and so they are working in isolation. They are working with people from your own perspective. If I write a novel now and there's a lot of West African references, and then there's someone that is editing the work and is not even editing it, the person is editing it based on their own understanding and perspective. They don't fully understand my culture and the reason why I'm saying some of the things I'm saying. And so there's a risk of it shaping up in the wrong way. Also, the way our storytelling is going as well, it also begs the question of, we need cultural intermediaries. So these are people that are kind of like tastemakers. So it could be institutions, so our own institutions that can possibly be on par with their own institutions. Individuals as well that also become strong forces and figures that can help us to speak in some of these stages. We do have a couple of people that are doing that in literature and music, in film and all of that, but we need more of that. We need to be at the forefront of like protecting our culture, our storytelling, our ideologies. And also there's a risk of economic exploitation as well, because a lot of times, right, this when people are taking up ideas from you, borrowing it from you, because we are not able at this point in time to match up to their rate of borrowing and incorporation, it might leave like an imbalance in the economic benefits. So when they are dominating the media, they're dominating the sales. So for example, for novel writing now, imagine like a Western author. I don't even want to use Western, but somebody, let's say an American author, because like he said, the West is so broad, and I also don't want to fit everything into one space. But imagine an American author writing a novel. So maybe I'm trying to think, something like a sci-fi novel, and they're using a lot of African references, and maybe the protagonist is like an American who went to Africa to go and save African cultures, and basically they are inspired. The person is moved by it, and then the person writes a novel that does well. And because they're looking for new stories, new ideologies, and because there's already a misrepresentation, they are more likely to patronize that author. And in that way, that person is profiting off our stories and our ideologies. So there's a risk of economic exploitation. There's a risk of, if we are not on top of this, with the old globalization and like combining everybody's cultures and ideologies, we might lose our own our cultural significance. We might lose our intellectual property. Our heritage is at risk. I'm trying not to push like fear and all of that, but I feel like we just need to be on top of it, and it's so critical. And I'm not against collaboration. I'm not saying that, oh, okay, so because our stories are being understood on a global stage, we should prevent people from taking up ideas. We also can write stories and experiences about this about Western experiences. So for example, there's a Jackpot wave in Nigeria now. People are going to all these countries, and they can write stories about Africans navigating the Western terrain. It's also a form of like borrowing and incorporating cultures and ideologies. But I just feel like we just need to be careful, and we need to be on top of it. And also one final point is also misrepresentation. If they don't fully understand the background and the context, there is the risk of misrepresenting things. The risk of also like perpetuating stereotypes. So still pushing forward the same old ideologies. And also, if these tastemakers are Western, if you don't have enough African tastemakers on the other side, they will keep recycling the same type of stories that they want to hear about Africa. And so it's very important that even with this new this global like proliferation of African stories, we need to be very careful so that we don't end up bending and shaping our culture, our history, our traditions, the fabric of everything that we are to suit, foreign narratives. And obviously, because of the power imbalance in place, we might feel like we have more to benefit from them, platforming us and helping us. But if we're able to like match up and ensure that our own people and culture, our own backgrounds, our own governments, our own institutions, our intermediaries, our tastemakers, and all of that are able to, be stronger, then maybe we have a chance at safeguarding this. So it's very important that we're talking about this, because it's great, it's amazing, the world is catching up, but there are serious risks associated with that. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much, Joy, for that beautiful take. I'll move to Mikhail. However, before I speak, I move to Mikhail. I wanted to confirm from ALS admin. When you say Abdul Karim is in the house, I was thinking that Abubakar Ada Ibrahim was supposed to be on the panel instead of Abdul Karim. Of course, Abdul Karim has been from the start of this conversation. So I want to be sure that I'm not mixing things up. Is the LS admin in-house? Okay. Why they would respond to that? My question, born in which I am to ask Mikhail is Mikhail. My question to you is this: you spoke about is it selective openness, if I am to use that phrase, with regards to how the West perceive Africa and African stories, and you've heard Joy's submission about the expectation and the possibility of engendering stereotypes and single narratives about Africa, based on the perception and expectation of the Western audience. If that were to be the case in terms of Africa, writing stories for the West, what would be your take? Is the West, in your opinion, selective in the kind of stories they want to read about Africa? Is there also an agenda in terms of, the sort of platforming that the West makes available to African writers?
Yes, thank you for the question, Paul, and thank you also to you, Faith, if I may call you by your first name, for your illuminating intervention. Yes, so my answer would be yes. There are certain discourses in the West that are prominent and that are, let us call it, fashionable. For example, the discourse of gender is very strong in certain academic and non-circles in the West. Thus, the narratives, the novels, for example, that explore the topic of gender or gender-based violence are the ones who will be selected to be represented. There are other discourses like migration, for example, that catalyze stories, narrative, and discourses from Africa on that topic. So I would say there are certain discursive spheres that are on trend, and which are more likely to create a platform for African writers if their writing is on these specific topics. But this is not only true for African literatures and narratives, but this is true also for European or Western narratives. So the literary market is definitely selective in the way that it follows the political discourses, trends, and topics that are preferred by the audiences because they are in vogue, which is not necessarily a negative thing. I think this is how the literary market works. So, for example, if feminist narratives are the narratives that are looked for in the West to reinforce certain discourses that are being made on the political and cultural levels, then necessarily literature on these topics is going to be the one that is most widely read and that is most widely considered. So this is one of the methods of selection, I would say. But I would, if I can add something else, I would like to comment on the issue of cultural appropriation, and I fully understand the point that has been made before. However, I found the comment in the chat interesting also to this topic, that we also by Eze Okereke, if I pronounce it right, sorry for my pronunciation, that we also share our experiences navigating in foreign spaces. So in that way, we too practice cultural appropriation. So that in this sense, cultural appropriation is a negative thing, and cultural appropriation means that I appropriate another culture to pretend that it is mine, and to pretend that I know it, and to pretend that I am an expert in it, or I take some aspects of a certain culture to create my identity without having full knowledge of that culture. But I am not really sure if this is truly happening in the West. I would say it is quite the opposite, that African narratives and stories are quite often ignored. And it's not that people want to appropriate them, they are just not aware of them very often. So I don't know if it is a widespread, so my perception is, I don't know if it is a widespread phenomenon or if it is a worrying thing, but I agree with the fact that it is the African people who need to represent African stories and narratives, who they are the ones who need to tell them, and they are the ones who have the power and the responsibility of sharing the specific of the culture, of the history of African people. But if these stories are then consumed by someone from another culture, from the West, and even if these people, in my opinion, even if they in some way imitate or get inspired by the stories or transform them in a way, they still function as a kind of channel of transmission of these stories. So I would see it as a positive thing if African narratives are received in the West and then they are repeated or even imitated or taken as an inspiration for people, because this contributes to the widespread of this narrative and for the people to come in contact with them for the first time. So my point is still, in the West, in my opinion, even though it's a very general term, the West, as we said, African narratives and stories are still not widely received, and this blocks the dialogue between Africa and the West. So this is my take on this.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I was going to ask you again. I like your perspective about African culture not being appropriated in the West, and rather looking at the possibilities of the platforms that the West provides to expand African story. However, a contrary perspective, in my opinion, would be one that highlights, the sheer fact that the one who has control over the means of, production, would determine the direction of production. In terms of, in this instance, I'm referring to, African or the West rather, I keen about African stories, but certain African stories. And that was why my earlier question was in regards to, of course, the perceived, selective openness to the kinds of story that the West wants to Africans to tell. If, for example, the issues of the issues of freedom, or the issues of sexuality, for example, are the burning issues in the West, and the West wants African stories to depict, this new sexual consciousness, of course, within the context of inclusion or inclusivity. How would you respond to this appropriation? It is an appropriation because the West is saying these are the kinds of stories that we want Africans to tell indirectly, and in doing so, they tag these stories as African stories. These are African narratives that are fashioned in the philosophies or ideologies of the West. So how do we reconcile, these issues, in your opinion?
Well, it's a tricky question.
Do you see this as a problem?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't have a straight answer to that, because I think it's a complex question, and I would love to have an answer to suggest a way to overcome that. But yes, you're right. So let me give you an example with what I mean about the selectiveness of discourses and of narratives. You see, for example, poetry, Nigerian poetry about the Niger Delta, the crisis in the Niger Delta, the destruction happening in the Niger Delta, would not be of interest to many Western readers. But because now climate change and environment and environmental studies are a discourse that is very fashionable in the West, this poetry becomes, for example, more relevant to Western readers, because they filter it through the discourse of the environment. In this sense, I don't think that it is necessarily something negative. It is a way for the Western audiences to, in the first place, to get in touch with this narrative, and maybe with this poetry, and from there to expand. So yes, I think that on the one hand, it is a negative thing that there is this selection of narratives and of types of literature that the West wants to consume. But on the other hand, it is also a channel, it is also a platform, a possibility for these narratives in the first place to reach out to the people. And I think any of these channels, any of the possibilities to get in dialogue, to get to know the other, so to say, the other culture, the other literary tradition, the other traditions in general, is an opportunity. And it is a positive opportunity to create this kind of dialogue. What needs to be done? Well, I think that Africa is definitely the future. I have no doubts about it that a shift is happening, a shift in perception of power about Africa is happening. The West, with its ideologies, with its discourses, with its limitations, is exhausting the possibilities of imagining a future. The West is stuck in its colonial mentality, in its capitalism, in its prejudice, and is not able to envision a future for the planet as a whole, or even for Europe or for the West as a concept. And the West is looking to Africa to learn about perspectives and narratives that can show ways that can lead the world toward a better future that is different from the past dominated by the West. I think that the domination of the West is ending. We should not look at the West as the future. The West is declining, and righteously so. But then, this said, if we consider Africa as the future, and it is, and the knowledges and the traditions that are there in Africa that have been ignored, ridiculed, stereotyped by the West for centuries, are now becoming very, very powerful, and I think that the West is realizing that. And now the problem, here comes the problem of appropriation or exploitation. Will the West use these narratives and these stories for itself by excluding Africa again? So will it steal the ideas? Will it steal the narratives to look better? Or will it be a collaboration into creating a new future together? Or will it be Africa to take the power of and control of these narratives and be the inspiration for the rest of the world. And I think this is what is happening, and this is how I perceive the narratives coming from Africa. They are the future. They contain knowledges, traditions that the West cannot produce anymore. The West is dead. This is my statement.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for your perspective. There have been very engaging, responses or reactions in the comment section, in the inbox as well. We should give, attention to them in due course. However, I wanted to state that one of the comments, which says, "Oh, sexuality has been." Of course, sexuality has always been part of, the African reality. However, the question is in regards to, or with regards to, how it becomes central, how it becomes an agenda, and how it becomes, the core for certain groups of people or for the West to push this reality. It's not that it was not there. But again, that is a conversation for another day. But if we were to respond to that, we would say, so there are several issues in Africa and about that Africans can write about and that are writing about in the story. But when we talk about this, issues like it's happening, there has been a conversation about the Americanization of Nigerian poetry of the newer generation, for example, that has been going on. The poets, because these journals, these Western, platforms specifically say, these are the kinds of poetry that we want to consume. These are the kind of stuff that we want to write. Now, therefore, limiting the possibility of poets or African poets, for example, encapsulating the entire cultural dynamics of the African continent, as a result of the validation that they get from the West. Whether this is a problem of the West, I do not know. I cannot say. But I think it's a conversation that will help us to, open up the space and understand what the possibilities are. And on this note, I would like to call on Abdul Karim Baba Aminu, who is in the house, to also, share lights or shed lights on some of these issues and on the topic of the discussion. We would also take Essie, who has been very strong, in her responses, and the other people who have been responding as well. Would like to take all of these perspectives to hear what the concerns are, and then I'll return to the panelists. So, Mr. Abdul Karim, if you are on and you would like to contribute to the conversation, please, you have the floor. Okay. If we can't get him, can we then listen to Ese? Ese, please, can you
Hi,
intervene?
sorry. Good. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I've really loved the conversation today. Thank you so much, Michael and Faith, for your responses. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, perfect. So I think what I've heard, it's making me ponder about how we see other, it's always easy to say, oh, the West is not telling our stories or they're not engaging with it. But I've also not considered, maybe when I hear the West, to be very fair, I think only United States. So Michael's point around like Germany, so even thinking like Europe, Asia, as someone who likes Korean drama, I'm not thinking, okay, do I know their stories? Am I really sure they are not also the next frontier for great stories? And then there was something Faith had mentioned around, the forms of stories we've told across time. So it's something, so I don't think I would say we are the next great frontier for stories. I would say we've always been the frontier for stories. So maybe what now needs to happen is for other people to pay attention. And I know that that's likely an issue with our legacy culture, our documentation culture, which is why I'm very happy about we're now in a very global connected space. So there's access to people sharing their stories in diverse channels that can now be consumed everywhere. I did have a question, so I don't know if I can ask it now or there's going to be a Q&A session later.
There's supposed to be a Q&A, but if you have the floor now, since you have the floor, you might as well just go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I think my question would be, what do we think realistically needs to happen, say, in the coming decade for other people to now pay attention? So it's one thing to say, I'm a big man in my house. Yes, we're the great frontier. But how do we get other people to know that we're actually in the great frontier? If I believe Michael's wonderful theory that the West is dying, how do we need them to know that the Africa is living? Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. So, okay, Grace. Is Grace in the house? Do you want to add your voice?
Yes, I am here.
Okay,
this is a fantastic discussion. I am so blown away by it. Incidentally, my name is actually Ejiro Mokoro. Everybody calls me Lady E. I'm using my sister's Zoom link to actually be part of this conversation. So let me just say something to Michael and Faith. You guys are right for this conversation. I love the perspective, the no holds bar. I love how you articulate the issues at the core of it, what drives them, what may be activators or sometimes triggers in a way. And then fundamentally, the two key points here is about ideologies and philosophies. And these drives nations. These drives how people are perceived. These drive how people emerge as even economic powers. It also drives even the conversation about how we begin to navigate in our interactions with people and the impact that has in building a different kind of worldview, a different society compared to what it has been in the past. I love how you mentioned, Michael, when you said that they're tired of being stuck in the past. And that is the truth. And what Africans are also not tapping into is that Africans should also realize that they too don't need to be stuck in the past of those colonial ideologies, philosophies, and stories. There is a new space for us to navigate into telling our narratives as they are. And that also calls to the question of why our publishing industry in Nigeria must begin to thrive. It means that as a people too, we now have a minister for culture, arts, and all of that conversation of creative economy. The question is, are we now tapping into that space? The advantages overseas have is that the platforms are there, the funding opportunities are there, and they understand the power of collaboration. And I think these are things we need to pick from them and drive us. I mean, an economy of 200,000 people, come on, people, we've got it going. And then with the likes of Abubakar, I'm an author as well, so I'm speaking from that place of passion, you know. And then we talk about our movie storytelling techniques and everything. We have international bodies that are tapping into the Nigerian talent spaces. And they're telling us how they want stories to be told because they are funding it. But what I've also observed is that we easily catapult, as it were, to their requirements rather than negotiate conversations sometimes, even though we want the funding. And I think one of the take-homes we should have is that we should be speaking from a place of power, from a place of knowing that, look, this is ours. Come on, this is ours, you know? So we need to learn improve on our negotiation skills. We need to get to the point where we say, okay, you know what? Can we just review this a bit here, a bit there? The conversation will shift, but you've got to show you got the power. You got to show you are a decision maker. This is your table. This is your space. You own it. And they want you. Let us not deceive ourselves. They want you. And you also want them. So it's a two-way street where value for value should be the conversation. And I think we can do so much more. So this panel is awesome. I have sent messages to both of you, Michael and Faith. I said I want to interview both of you past this conversation here. I run Light Train Media. It's a platform where I want to deliberately, consciously begin to drive such kinds of conversations in open spaces like nobody else does in Nigeria, because this is where it is. This is where the future is. So that's just my contribution so far.
Okay, thank you very much, Ejiro Omukuru. I hope I got the name right. My network is a
very
bit
correct. Very correct.
Yeah, my network is fluctuating, so but I hope you can hear me, guys. So thank you for that very resounding perspective and contribution, and it brings me to the next question I was going to ask. My network, sorry, my network messed up, but I am back now. Can you hear me? Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I was going to Ejiro's respond, sort of preempted my next question, which I was going to pose to Faith, and others who would contribute to the conversation. Who should be responsible for telling the African stories? Where are the platforms in Africa that should facilitate, the projection of the African stories that we want the world to hear, instead of Africa depending on Western platforms to tell their maybe just syncretic stories, or to tell those particular stories that they are interested, in telling the world. And we would look at what is the state of publishing in Africa and in Nigeria in particular today, where we do not have a functional system that should enable our literatures and our narratives to thrive. How can then we, hold other people responsible for the sort of projection or perception that they have of us, or the sort of expectation that they have of us with regards to the kind of stories that they want to consume? I don't know if Faith wants to respond to these issues.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you very much for that. When Michael was talking, I was really intrigued by a lot of things he said, especially the part of we have a major decision to make, whether we would rise up to the challenge or whether we'll be at their mercy and depend on their platforms, or whether it will be a sort of collaboration, right? So I'm leaning towards the first and the last. So building up our own competency and power, and also collaborating. And even for collaborations, if the power is uneven, the collaboration would not be a collaboration, it would be an exploitation. So the first thing that we need to do is the foundation of everything. Now, I like that you mentioned publishing, and I think that's one aspect of our storytelling that is really struggling in terms of the platforms. So we have writers, we have a lot of talented writers and storytellers and people who can share their work. But the issue is the platforms. We don't have enough strong and powerful publishing platforms in Nigeria. Something that I noticed that has happened a lot is the republishing of already successful writers outside of Nigeria. So it feels like until these writers are validated externally before we publish them here. And I feel like that dependence is also another problem in terms of shaping up the kind of stories that are produced and created. So firstly, we need to work on our publishing platforms. We don't even have a strong distribution platform, even within Africa. To get a book from another African country, I know the struggles I went through to get, was Koleka Putuma's book. I had to send somebody to travel to get it for me. So even from Africa itself, we first need to work on our publishing houses. We need more strong publishing houses. We need better distribution channels. And I run a literary organization. I know the struggles. A lot of it is self-funded. Some years ago, the Nigerian government set up like this creative fund, and they listed all the different creative arts and platforms. And literature was not there. It was like literature wasn't something that was prioritized. And literature is the foundation of a lot of storytelling. I like that many movies in Nigeria now are trying to reproduce some of our books and all of that. But if our literature is ignored, if the government doesn't support us, then how do we even push ourselves? Because we need a strong support. We can't do it in isolation. We can't do it based on individual funding. So the first thing is our government needs to be more invested in literature. So more policies, more funding, more grants. They need to take on literature as like something that is their priority. That's very important. Also, in terms of like pushing our work out there, if we're able to get the structures, fund ourselves, we also need more festivals. We have festivals, like this is a great avenue. We have Ake Festival, we have Abuja Literary Festival, we have Leap Festival, ALITFEST, but we still need more platforms, and we need more audience, our people, to attend these festivals and support. So we need to find new ways to market literature to even ourselves. People read, but I feel like even the ratio of reading to the market size is not. So even before we can convince people outside, we need to start convincing people here. And I like this publishing house. I think it's Master Bay Books. I like what they did with Nearly All the Men in Lagos Are Mad. A lot of people read that book. A lot of people. So it shows that with the right marketing, with the right positioning, we can even build our own publishing house in here and get more new and innovative ways to market.
Sorry, I don't know if it's my network. Faith is frozen here at my end. I think it's my network.
No, Paul, I think it's not your network.
We can't hear her too.
Oh, okay. I think our network is a bit faulty. Okay, we'll move on. I'm sure when she gets it fixed, she would rejoin. Mika, I was going to come to Mika, but before I ask you this question, I wanted to state, like all the conversation has been going, all the contributions I've highlighted, especially with the last speaker's contribution with regards to the absence of a functional publishing system and literary distribution system that should enable the, development of African literature. It is indeed a reality that, over the years, is it close to 60-something years after Chido Achebe's things fall apart, African literature and African writers continues to look to the West, for the, not just publishing, but for the canonization of African literature. Like somebody said in the comment section, if you know blue for London or for West, you're not even celebrated in Nigeria. So is this actually a Western problem, or is it an African problem? I ask this again with respect to the entire conversation about the evolution that is taking place in Africa, even in terms of the economic policies, the economic conversation that have been going on. I have been following. We see the coups that are taking place in some countries, in Africa, in West Africa to be precise. And you'll find that it is the quest to renegotiate Africa's consciousness and place within the global economic discourse, and are we seeing some renewed consciousness towards Africa's independence from dependence on the West or on Europe, so to speak. Again, if this were to be the case, if Africa is, seeking for economic independence from the West or from Europe, yet its greatest ally, which it depends upon for this emancipation, is Russia, which is another European or Western superpower. Can Africa truly be free of these hegemonies that continues to influence its growth? Looking at how far we've come and the politics that is playing out, around the world, whether in cultural production, whether in economic and resource control, as it were, today. But Mikhail, my question to you, while we ponder on this, is how do we foster, how do we foster collaboration? How do we foster an environment that does not undervalues any of the sides? How do we foster a system where the West truly is interested in enabling the development of African literature or the production of African stories, across the divide and from various perspectives? Do you think that there are gaps? There are, areas that can be improved upon in terms of making this happen?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for the question. So before I answer it, I would like to make one little comment. What I found interesting also is that in our conversation, we are mainly talking about the West. What is the perception of the West? Not what is the perception of the world. You mentioned Russia. There are many other places in the world that are not the West. And so already by giving all this importance to the West, we are kind of undermining that the most important goal is that the West listens to African narratives. But I wouldn't say that it is so. You are asking now how to foster the connection. I think that the focus is not how to foster the connection and how to convince the West to listen to African narratives, giving this importance and power to the West as if it was crucial that the West finally accepts African narratives. So it's not about convincing the West, in my opinion, but it's about empowering Africans to produce their own narratives in the first place for themselves and for whatever audience is ready to listen. It does not need to be the West. This is the little comment that I wanted to make before. But this said, of course, dialogue is important and connection is important among people of different cultures in the world. This kind of connection through literature and through poetry is the fostering of common humanity, is the fostering of understanding that we all belong to the same planet. Beyond the divisions into Africa, the West, the global North, the global South, I think that in order to be able, so this is my point, in order to be able to overcome this gap and to foster this connection and the dialogue, we should look beyond the concepts of the West and the East and the South and the North, but just to consider all the audiences. So African poets and African writers produce narratives. I think should produce narratives without asking themselves, how will the West perceive my narratives, or how can I make my narrative so that the West will publish me and I will be read in the West? I think this is not the question. I think that the question should be, I produce my narratives, I produce my stories because I want to, and whoever wants to read them will read them. And it can be for my people, it can be for other people. But forging narratives with the intention to be accepted by the West reinforces the uneven power relationship. This is my answer. So I would not say that African writers should concentrate on received by the West, but they should just concentrate on writing, and whoever wants to read this narrative will read them and will find them. That's my
Thank you very much, Mikhail. I'm sure you know that has always been my position. Africans must write for themselves. I do not believe that Africa should write for any audience other than the African audience. If the West, piques interest in African stories and are interested in reading them, they should read them for the sake that they are reading to encounter African knowledge, culture, philosophies, and ideologies. That has always been my position, and I'm happy you have reiterated it very vehemently in your position. Faith didn't complete her. Mika, you want to say something? Because we are going to move after Faith now to audience response and reactions and questions, and then we'll move to the other phase, before we call it a day. So, Mika, if you wanted to add something before we move to Faith.
No, please let us move to Faith. Sorry, yes. I just wanted to say that I will have to
leave. Thank you.
Faith, in a few minutes.
You were on before your network got disrupted. Please take the floor.
Okay, so some of the points I wanted to make has been made, but I would just like to add to the point about building our own platforms and creating for ourselves. And a great example is our music industry. We've been creating music for ourselves. A large part of the success of our music industry can be rooted in the fact that as Africans, as Nigerians, let me focus on Nigerian music. We enjoyed the music that we created. We supported our artists. We supported our platforms and everything. And that gave them the capacity, that gave them the funding, that gave them the structure to now begin to push out there. So in the past, sorry about that. In the past, a big aspect of it was some of the biggest artists from Nigeria would get signed by some of these major production houses in the US, in the UK. But recently, there's now a shift to it because we're now empowered, because we now have the funding and the structures. We are now going on these global stages with our own platforms. A great example is Maven. I really like what Maven is doing for music. Their artists are on the global stage. So we have Ira Star, we have Rema, but they are still under Maven. They are still under an African-owned platform. And I feel like we can borrow from that in literature. If we're able to develop our publishing houses to get to a point where it's mainstream, people are engaging with it, even with poetry, spoken word poetry, if we're able to make more people interested, to make it less about a case of just education and informing, but making it more something that people can making it more of something that people can enjoy for entertainment purposes, like brand it in a way that it's more accessible. I'm not saying dumb down the the education part of things, but just make it more accessible for people. And that thing I wanted to add was our government as well. Beyond just supporting us here, we have embassies across the world. They can also explore cultural diplomacy. They can also create platforms and avenues for people to enjoy our works. Like if as independent artists, we don't have the funding, but if our embassies in these different countries are able to create platforms and create festivals and events that we can now leverage, that can also help us. So the point is we need to see our literature beyond just, oh, it's sad and it's bad.
Hello, I don't know again if it is a network problem. I can't hear Faith. Can anyone hear her? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't hear her. I can't hear her either.
Oh, okay. So thank you. I think we'll move on and we'll take responses from the from the participants. If you have any questions, although Mikhail has apologized, he had earlier informed that he has a class at about this hour, so he would be leaving, to attend to his class.
Yes.
But we can then ask our questions and, maybe also respond to some of the issues that have been raised. Mary Egop, sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name well. Please, you can add your voice to this conversation. You've been very active in the chat box. We would like to hear you voice those very insightful contributions. Bash Amuneni. Okay, sorry, Bash hands has been up. Bash, please take the floor. Then we'll take Mary and any other person who has a contribution to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. The engagement has been so brilliant. I wish it wouldn't stop. Thank you, Faith and Michael, for such brilliant insights on a lot. So I just want to say that I want to draw from Michael's last point, where he was not suggesting, but just actually saying that African writers should not look up to the West for validation in that manner. I think one of the challenges we have is always trying to point fingers to the government for not doing this or for not doing that. I actually feel strongly that the Association of Nigerian Authors is really just a mess, because I know the resources that the Association of Nigerian Authors has, resources in terms of financing, the resources in terms of people, and I'm still wondering what the Association of Nigerian Authors are actually doing. With the resources that the institution has, Nigerian literature shouldn't be at the level it is. And I do not know why there's just that terrible, terrible disconnect between the association and the actual writers, between the association and young writers. I do not even know who needs to get what fixed, but it's just something I've noticed, and I'm really bothered because I am a member of the Association of Nigerian Authors Abuja chapter. I'm also a member of the Abuja Literary Society and other literary societies in the country. So it really bothers me because that one association can actually fix a lot of the challenges we have mentioned today. If the Association of Nigerian Authors can just sit up, they can really put up programs, fellowships, residencies, whatever, awards. They can really make it what is stalled. Because at the end of the day, why we look up to, or why a lot of Nigerian writers or African writers sort of look up to the West to validate their writing is because they have some of these things set. They have some of these things in place. And you know how Nigerians are. Until you are validated by the West, that's when some people will start respecting you at home. So there's always that challenge of how do I swing as a writer. So if you want to tell yourself, oh, well, I do not care about what the West thinks about my writing, I'm just going to write. And at some point you might be moved to start questioning if you're actually doing the right thing, because you might find out that you might just be on your own at some point, because the writers that will probably be celebrated or being celebrated around you will be writers that have been validated by the West. So, for me, I feel like we should take this problem to the Association of Nigerian Authors and engage these people. And they just have to, going forward, the Association of Nigerian Authors needs to do what is right. I do not know if young writers have to draw or call on a sit down with these guys. If Nigerian writers, young writers need to just come together and say, look, dudes, we need to talk to you people. What is going on? These are our demands or something. I'm not instigating for a rebel movement, but I'm just saying, because it's just so difficult to get into the heads of these men and understand what they are up to. But again, so that I don't take the whole time, I just feel like if we engage the Association of Nigerian Authors better, it will be just be for the general good of creative writing and literature in Nigeria. Thanks.
Thank you, Basha, for your contribution. You have always been vehement about your position with regards to the key role that the Association of Nigerian Authors can play in leveraging its resources to foster the growth and development of Nigerian literature, especially, in creating an environment that works for younger writers. That is a very important point. I think, somehow there is going to be something that could be done in that regard. So thank you very much for that. I would like to now, is there any other person who would like to contribute to the conversation? You can indicate by, virtually waving your hand. can raise your hand and you take the floor. Is there anyone who wants to contribute to the conversation? Okay, well, if Mary is talking about the need to consider the place of language and the picture of storytelling, like the challenge of telling our indigenous stories in a foreign language, that I doubt we can perfectly present our cultural uniqueness and richness in a non-indigenous language. Thus, the West doesn't consume it as much, and neither do the bulk of Africans. So, very brilliant contributions in the comment section. I hope and pray that the ALS team will be able to aggregate this conversation and do a proper maybe report, around these issues that have been raised, so that there could be like a summary report of the conversation and the issues that have been raised that can be published and presented to the public for, further interaction. So the floor is still open for, for participants to respond or to ask questions to the panelists with regards to the issues that have been raised. And you can do this by just raising your hand, or you can just go ahead and speak, since not many people are responding. Okay, if there are no further responses or reactions or questions, I'd like to think that we have done justice to this topic. This panel has been very wonderful, and I'd like to thank the panelists, Faith, for her very strong perspectives on the issues, Mikhail for his very accommodating and equally strong perspectives with response or with regards to the issues that have been raised, and our dear participants for the very brilliant comments in the sections that we've seen. I don't want to repeat it because I'd like to assume that participants have been following the comments and the conversation, so there wouldn't be any point really regurgitating all that has been said. But to also would like to thank the ALS for finding me worthy to moderate this panel discussion. I must say that I found it very interesting and intriguing. I enjoyed all the perspectives, that we shared. I wished I was on the panel as a discussant and not as the moderator, to also air some of my personal perspectives. But again, it was a very brilliant session. I enjoyed all the contributions. So I would like to call on the ALS admin, I don't know if it's Joy, to take over from us, or from me rather, and lead us into the last phase of the event for this panel. So Ms. Joy, or is it ALS admin? If you're here, please, would you take over?
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paul. And please, can we give a round of an applause for him? Just, put it in the, I don't say chat box, but just a round of an applause for him. Thank you so much for guiding this session. It has been so enlightening and it's been enjoyable. I think we can all agree that this was enjoyable, insightful, and it was such a necessary conversation. Thank you so much for guiding it. Thank you to the panelists for such an incredible insight on the issue. And you were able to touch on I would like to say everything that needed to be touched on. Thank you so much. This was really insightful. To move on, we'll be having a poll. So I will be launching a poll now for everyone to participate. Please just quickly, it's going to take you less than a minute to just answer these questions, and the moment you answer it, I'll give a brief on what we'll be having today and tomorrow. And that will be it. Please, let's answer this question. I think it's now up on your phones and your platform, your system, whatever you're using. So please just quickly answer the questions. This is very important for us because for us, it's not just about having a conversation. We want to also know that we've been able to glean from the conversation and that we were able to get the point of the conversation that's been had. So please, I can see one person has done it. Please, let's keep it coming. No, there are 26 of us. We should 29 of us. Let's just keep it coming as we're answering these questions. Thank you so much to everyone who's been answering. Yes. Yes, let's just keep it coming and coming and coming. Yeah, so we have 6 people. We have 19 more to go. Please, let's keep answering. Yes, it was a great conversation today. Yes, okay, 9 people, 10, 11, 12, amazing. 13, yes, yes. So we have 12 more people, 14, yes. Okay, thank you to everyone. Please, let's keep answering. Let's keep answering the questions, yes. 15, so we have 10 more people to go. Yes, 16. Please, let's keep answering. And this is really helpful for us. Yes. Please, let's keep answering. We have 9 more people. 9 more people. It's just a simple. It's not something that is that would show your name or anything. It's just a simple poll that we could just answer and be done. Yes. Okay. We have 8 more people. 8 more people. Please just answer the poll and we'll be done in another minute. Yes, please. Okay. So while this is still running, we would later today by 5 p.m. sharp, we'll be having a film screening, and it promises to be an amazing session, just like this was. And of course, we do urge you to be a part of this film screening. It's a crucial part of the festival this year, and it's going to be amazing. The topics we're going to discuss, having the filmmaker just discuss the process and the story. I think this is very crucial for us. And like we have said earlier on, that we need to kind of support our own art and to elevate it in our own minds. This is an avenue for us to do the same because we're using an indigenous filmmaker in Abuja, and we want to really spotlight the story. So please, we urge you, be a part of the film screening later today. It promises to be an amazing, amazing experience. Tomorrow, we'll be having another panel session early in the day before we have the Grand Slam later in the evening. Tomorrow by 7, which is going to be amazing to watch poets just go at it and, you know, come out and win the grand prize of ₦1 million, which is amazing. It's so amazing. So please, we can't wait to experience it with you, and we do urge you to be a part of it. So far, we have 19 persons who have taken this poll, and I want to say thank you to everyone who has taken it. We're so grateful. This means a lot to us. And with that, I think we can bring this session to an end. Thank you very much and have the best day going forward. See you later today. Bye, everyone.
Everyone, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.